August 4th, 1832, Virginia.
The Bellamy Plantation was burning, not with fire, but with heat. The kind of punishing southern heat that clings to your lungs and melts the skin behind your neck. Cicadas screeched from the trees. The air was thick, still, and watching. Inside the main house, the Bellamy dining room gleamed. Crystal chandeliers swayed slightly, disturbed by a breeze that never came. The long, polished table was a portrait of southern wealth. Roast duck stuffed with apples, steaming sweet potatoes glazed in molasses, warm biscuits stacked high in silver baskets, and tall glasses of sweet tea sweating under the weight of the humidity. Everything shimmered with wealth and rot. At the head of the table sat Master Joseph Bellamy, flushed with drink, bloated with pride. A man who believed nothing in this world could touch him until it did. At first, a cough, then another, and another. Bellamy's hand jerked upward, gripping the edge of the table. His face twisted. Veins in his neck bulged like knotted rope. His mouth opened, but no words came. Only a choking sound. A gargle. Then, collapse. His teacup fell. Shattered porcelain, amber liquid spilling across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain of sugar and secrets. Around him, chaos, screams, chairs pushed back, silverware crashed to the floor. One of the guests backed away in horror as Bellamy convulsed violently, until finally, the movement stopped. Dead. The room fell into a thick silence, one so complete you could hear the creak of floorboards beneath trembling feet, and standing in the corner, a young man, barefoot, dressed in simple linen, his hands trembling, eyes lowered. His name was Ezekiel. To the white guests, he was just another house servant, a ghost in the walls, a shadow in the hall. He poured the tea. He cleared the dishes. He whispered, "Yes, sir," with just enough obedience to be invisible. But this time, something was different. You could feel it. Imagine you were there, watching a room full of southern nobility brought to its knees, not by gunfire or rebellion, but by the sweetest thing on the table. Tea. Now, imagine knowing the man who served it knew exactly what would happen next, because this wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Before the summer was over, 7 more plantation owners, neighbors, allies, friends of Bellamy would fall the same way, some after a dinner party, some in their sleep, one while reading the Holy Bible. Each poisoned, slowly, elegantly, and no one suspected Ezekiel, or did they? He kept his head down, hands steady, demeanor calm. But behind those eyes, something moved, something calculating. What drives a man, born in chains, to study death with such patience? Why choose poison over escape? Why tea over torch? Was it revenge? A message? Or simply the only power he could grasp in a world that gave him none? And if no one suspected him, then why do whispers of his name still echo across Virginia's haunted plantations to this day? This was no accident, no fever, no act of God. This was murder, and it was only just beginning. Before Ezekiel ever touched the tea tray, he was born into heat, hunger, and silence. Bellamy Plantation sat on 400 acres of Virginia land, with white columns so tall they seemed to stab the sky. To the guests who visited, it looked like a monument to southern glory. Clean linens on every bed, silver polished so brightly it hurt to look at. A manicured rose garden lined with marble statues imported from Europe. But behind that beauty was blood. Just a few yards past the great house stood the slave quarters, splintered wood, no windows, dirt floors. The air smelled of sweat, ash, and damp straw. Babies cried in the night, rats scurried in corners, People slept on thin mats with bruised backs and hollow stomachs. This was where Ezekiel lived. Imagine this contrast with your own eyes. A silver fork at the master's table, while a child chews mouldy cornbread beside a broken chamber pot. The Bellamys were known for being refined. They read Shakespeare by candlelight, held lavish parties. They believed themselves cultured, but cruelty was woven into every inch of the estate. Overseers whipped for pleasure. Runaways were chained in the smokehouse. And then there was the cellar, the place where punishments were delivered in darkness. Some never came back out. Ezekiel had been there. He bore the scars, but he never spoke of them. Instead, he served, quiet, still, watching. Because when you're trapped, in hell, sometimes silence becomes a weapon, and observation becomes preparation. What if everything he'd endured, every insult, every bruise, was part of a plan? A storm was brewing beneath the linen, and nobody saw it coming. They say a weapon is only as dangerous as the hand that holds it. But what if the weapon isn't a blade, or a whip, or a gun? What if it's knowledge? Ezekiel didn't always walk the quiet halls of the Bellamy plantation. Eyes lowered, voice muted, hands steady as he poured sweet tea into porcelain cups. No, before the tea, before the poison, before the deaths, there was another life. He was 13 when they sold him. Small for his age, wrists too thin for field work, but eyes. Eyes sharp enough to make even the overseers uneasy. They shipped him off from a rundown sugar farm in Cumberland County to a forgotten estate on the border of Richmond. The master there was dying, slowly, pitifully. A former physician with trembling hands and a rattling cough, with no sons, no legacy, just shelves of dusty leather-bound books and a hunger to pass on what he knew before the worms claimed him. And for reasons no one ever understood, he chose Ezekiel. Imagine it, a slave boy, barefoot, sitting cross-legged on a cold brick floor, holding a candle in one hand and a medical text in the other, trying to pronounce hydrocyanic acid by moonlight. The doctor, too weak to speak much, would simply point at drawings of the human body, then at the herbs drying on the wall. He taught Ezekiel how blood flows, how lungs collapse, how death can be slow or instant depending on the dose. Ezekiel learned to identify every plant that bloomed in Virginia's soil: henbane, belladonna, nightshade, foxglove, sassafras, oleander. He learned how much of each could stop a heartbeat. By 16, he knew more about poison than any white man in the county. But here's the truth: knowledge alone does not breed rebellion. You can know how to kill a man and still bow to him out of fear, still shiver at the crack of a whip, still dream of escape and wake up to chains. So what changed? Maybe it was the promise. His second master, a tall, golden-haired merchant from Richmond, once pulled Ezekiel aside after a long day of hauling barrels. "You keep your head down, boy," he whispered, "and I'll put your name in the papers. You'll be a free man by Christmas." Ezekiel believed him. For months he endured everything. He took lashes, cleaned vomit, slept in straw, never once broke a rule. And then Christmas came, and nothing changed. When Ezekiel asked about the freedom papers, the master laughed and said, "Ain't no man in his right mind gonna free a slave that knows how to read." That night, something broke, not with rage, not with screams, but with silence. The kind of silence that builds a fire deep inside the chest, not wild and reckless, but cold, calculated. The next morning, Ezekiel began sweeping the kitchen floors. 2 weeks later, the master's wife fell ill. By the third week, Ezekiel was sold again, this time to the Bellamy estate. Too quiet, the merchant had warned, too clever. At Bellamy's, Ezekiel kept his head low again, but this time not out of fear, out of preparation. He memorized the routines. Breakfast at 7, tea at 2, whiskey at dusk. He mapped which servants stood where, who watched the cutlery, which cups were reused. Which ones sat for hours in the summer heat? But still, even with all this, he waited. Why? Because he needed a reason. Not just a method, not just opportunity, but fuel. And then it came. One afternoon, in the sugar shed, he found his mother, face down, whip marks so deep they oozed black. She was alive, barely, but unconscious. Flies buzzing, her dress torn. The overseer said she had backtalked the cook. Backtalked. That night, Ezekiel sharpened nothing. He didn't steal a blade, didn't plan a runaway. Instead, he went to the herb shed, picked a leaf from a vine no one else noticed, crushed it, mixed it with mint, boiled it into syrup, and, on Sunday, he served it to Master Bellamy. Just a few drops in the tea, just enough to make him cough, to make the walls crack, to make the cracks split wide open. But that was only the beginning. Because once you learn how to kill without ever lifting your voice, who do you choose next, and how many before someone suspects the boy who just pours the tea? They called it a fever at first. Just one of those southern summer plagues. The kind that crept through the plantations when the air turned thick as syrup and the water sat too long in the troughs. No one questioned it when old Mr. Bellamy took to bed, coughing blood into a handkerchief. These things happened, they said. Heat, fatigue, bad meat maybe. But what about the next week, when Master Rawlins, 2 plantations over, collapsed during Sunday supper? And what about the week after that, when Mistress Hargrave began vomiting black into the basin, her skin going cold despite the July sun? By August, 8 masters were dead, and the whispers began. Picture it, Virginia, 1832, the tobacco fields, humming with cicadas, the air heavy with the smell of honeysuckle and rot. Slaves worked slower, quieter, not from laziness, but because something had shifted. You could feel it, like the ground itself was waiting for something to erupt. Ezekiel was always there, always calm, pouring tea, lighting candles, delivering letters, always unnoticed. That's what made him dangerous, and no one could prove a thing. No broken glass, no strange vials, just sudden illness, night sweats, blue lips, death. And the only pattern? All 8 of the dead had attended a plantation supper 2 months prior, the very supper where Ezekiel had been quietly serving from the shadows. Coincidence, said the doctor from Richmond. Bad air, contagion. But the slaves knew better. They began calling him Ghost Fingers. Said he could touch a cup and curse it, that he walked barefoot through the gardens at night, whispering to the herbs, that he prayed not to God, but to the ancestors. Of course, Ezekiel never confirmed a thing. He just kept working, just kept watching, because now, fear was spreading faster than any poison. Imagine being there, working in that kitchen, watching white men tremble at the sight of a teacup, watching women refuse to eat unless the food was tested first, watching overseers inspect their drinks like they were jewels, watching them try to survive a world they could no longer control. And all the while, Ezekiel never ran, never hid, because he didn't have to. When your weapon is invisible, you are too. But power like that, it never goes unnoticed for long. 1 afternoon, a new overseer arrived, hired from Georgia, rough, suspicious, eyes like stone. He watched Ezekiel too closely, and one evening, after supper, he cornered the boy by the garden shed. "You think we don't know?" he hissed. "You think they all just died from bad luck?" Ezekiel said nothing, just bowed, just like always. But in his pocket was a single dried berry, and in the overseer's cup the next day, you can guess what happened. The man dropped mid-conversation, foaming at the mouth. No one touched the body, because by now, even the whites were afraid of curses. And yet, someone had noticed something. A slip-up, not from Ezekiel, but from a girl in the laundry quarters. She'd seen something. A strange powder on a cloth, a whisper of something bitter on the rim of a cup. She told the housemaid. The housemaid told the cook. And the cook, well, the cook told Master Claiborne. And now, the net was closing, because power breeds suspicion, and even the ghost eventually leaves footprints. But what would happen when the hunters got too close? Would Ezekiel flee? Would he confess? Or would he do what he always did, serve the final cup in silence? They never expected him to be the one holding the tray. August 27th, 1832, the final supper at Claiborne Hall. Candles lined the long mahogany table, flickering like nervous sentries. 12 guests, all plantation owners, dressed in ivory, waistcoats and blood-colored cravats, their laughter bouncing off marble columns and ceiling frescoes. Outside, the wind was picking up. A storm was coming, but inside, celebration, to the living, to wealth, to survival, because they believed the worst was over. The sickness had passed, they claimed. No one had died in 2 weeks. Perhaps it had been the swamp fever after all. Perhaps their new overseer, brought in from Tennessee, had scared the bad spirits away. So, they drank. They toasted. They smiled, and they never noticed the quiet man in the corner, the one who poured the wine, Ezekiel. Dressed in clean linens, shoes polished, expression unreadable, his hands did not tremble. Not tonight. Tonight, he was free, but not the kind of freedom that came with papers or promises. This was something older, sharper, like justice aged in oak barrels and poured into crystal. And in his satchel, a pouch. Just a pinch of it was enough. Harvested weeks ago, dried in the attic above the stables, mixed with molasses to mask the bitterness. Belladonna, deadly nightshade, known by slaves as devil's berry, known by Ezekiel as a key. He moved between the guests with grace, refilling glasses, clearing plates, smiling just enough. And then he approached the head of the table, Master Claiborne himself, the man who once ordered a pregnant woman whipped for dropping a silver spoon, the man who once carved the word thief into a boy's shoulder blade for stealing a piece of bread. Claiborne raised his glass. To order, he declared, to power, and to the Almighty, who blessed this land with structure. The others roared in approval. Ezekiel stepped forward and offered the toast, not in words, in wine. He filled every cup, one by one. Smooth, precise, gentle as death's whisper. But his eyes never left Claiborne. You can almost hear the creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, the hiss of the wind against the shutters, the soft clink of glass against wood. They drank, all of them, except one. An older guest, Mr. Tallow, who rarely touched spirits, swirled his cup, sniffed it, and frowned. Bit off this one, he muttered. Tastes like almonds. Ezekiel froze, only for a moment. Then he bowed. Shall I bring you another bottle, sir? Tallow hesitated, then nodded. But it was too late, because Claiborne was already choking. At first, they thought it was indigestion. He leaned forward, coughing, waving a hand. His face turned a deep red. His lips cracked open, and then he collapsed. Hard. His head struck the edge of the table on the way down. Screams followed. Panic erupted like fire. 2 other men dropped to their knees, vomiting uncontrollably. One clawed at his throat. Another began to seize. And amidst the chaos, Ezekiel stepped back, calm, like a conductor ending a symphony. Imagine the scene. 12 white men, men who owned hundreds, who dictated life and death with a nod, now writhing on the marble like fish pulled from water. The servants fled, some prayed, some laughed. No one stopped Ezekiel. No one could. He walked through the kitchen, through the back corridor, past the pantry and the garden. He did not run, because this was not escape. This was conclusion. And the rain? It began to fall. Slow, At first, then harder, washing the blood from Claiborne's lips, washing the sins from the land. But this isn't a victory story, because vengeance has a cost. And as Ezekiel disappeared into the Virginia pines, stories began to spread of a ghost man with poison on his fingers, of a slave who never raised a hand, only a bottle, and of a final toast that silenced the masters forever. But was it justice, or just another ghost added to history's graveyard? And did Ezekiel ever find freedom, or simply become another hunted shadow? Because while the bodies were buried, the fear, it lingered, and what came next was darker still. They buried the dead in unmarked graves, not out of shame, but fear. Claiborne, Tallow, Bellamy. 8 men in total, their names once spoken with reverence, now avoided like curses. The plantations shuttered their windows, wives fled north, children were sent away, and the slaves, they watched, silent, still, waiting, because something had changed, not in the law, not in the chains, but in the air. Ezekiel's name was never spoken in court. No trial, no manhunt, no official record, just hushed whispers that crawled through the fields like smoke. Some said he died in the swamp. Others claimed he boarded a riverboat disguised as a preacher. But the truth doesn't always survive history, only the echo. Imagine walking through Virginia, decades later. A child hesitates before sipping his tea. An old planter hires a food taster, not for status, but for survival. And every time someone coughs at the table, hearts skip a beat. Ezekiel had left behind no manifesto, no rebellion, no visible scar, only the slow, spreading dread of possibility. That one man, one quiet, obedient, invisible man, had brought an empire of brutality to its knees, with nothing but knowledge, patience, and a teaspoon of poison. But history didn't call him a freedom fighter. They never do. He was labeled a demon in some tales, a devil in human skin. In others, he was a legend, a ghost, a symbol of what it meant to suffer without breaking. And for the next 50 years, in every plantation kitchen across the South, new rules emerged. Never leave your drink unattended. Never mistreat the house staff. Never trust silence. Because silence, they learned, is not submission, it's strategy. One former slave, decades later, told a Union soldier during Reconstruction, they feared Ezekiel more than Nat Turner, because Turner fought with fire. Ezekiel fought with time. But what became of him? Did he live to see the Civil War? Was he hiding among the Union ranks, serving coffee to generals, slipping hints of his past between lines of scripture? Or did he simply vanish, swallowed by the very system he shattered? No one knows. But the legacy, it remained. You see, rebellion doesn't always come in the form of chains being broken or torches lit. Sometimes it comes in the shape of a leaf dropped into a pot of tea, a whisper shared in a quiet hallway, a name never forgotten. And to this day, if you ask the elders in certain corners of Virginia about the poisoner, they won't meet your eyes. They'll nod once, say nothing, and change the subject. Because some stories, they don't end. They ferment, like fear, like truth, like revenge steeped for centuries. So the next time you sip sweet tea on a warm southern day, ask yourself, what kind of man stirs sugar while planning a revolution? What kind of pain must live inside a person to kill, slowly, methodically, without ever lifting a fist? And what kind of world forces a man to become a ghost just to be free? Stories like this must never be forgotten, not because they glorify violence, but because they expose the cost of silence, the weight of cruelty, and the lengths to which one soul might go to tip the balance. If you want more forgotten histories, more voices from the shadows, stay with us. Because this story, this was just one teaspoon in a sea of poison.